All right, welcome everyone. We're excited to be here, and a very special welcome to Joel Holtzman. So happy that you could be here with us.
Thanks for having me, Brandon. Thank you.
So, one thing that I wanted to do, obviously, like I said in the introduction, and also yesterday when I talked to people, we know you from the work that you've done with us on Dark Ages.
Correct.
Um, but you have a very impressive portfolio with the things that you have worked on in the past and so forth. So let's start by you telling us basically your background. How did you get into artwork? What are some of the things that you have worked on and so forth?
So I'm currently working as an illustrator and a concept artist in the entertainment industry. I've been working digitally for around 8 years now, and around 10 years aiming to become a professional. So total of 10 years. I'm one of those kids that's been doing art its entire life, with ups and downs. Of course, usually when you're in high school, you have less time to work on art, but everything went back to painting eventually for me. So that has been my passion for as long as I can remember. I've been working in the entertainment industry right now. When it comes to clients, I have received multiple assignments from Games Workshop. I've worked for Disney Star Wars. I have worked for Tor Books recently, Pathfinder RPG back in the day as well. For the Dune movie that got released this week, actually, I was tasked to create promotional artwork for the RPG for Legendary Entertainment and Odysseus. And besides that, I work for many other clients, including the amazing folks at Board&Dice. It was a very fun collaboration to work with you, and a multitude of other RPGs, book covers. I like to get as broad as possible with my clientele and the amount of different types of assignments that I get, as long as it's realistic and I don't have a very broad style. I like to receive different kinds of assignments. For
Mm-hmm.
example, video games, board games, or card games, or books. But I don't like to work very broad in terms of styles. You don't see me do graphic design or line art as much. I like to work. I like to emulate oil paints with digital media.
Right. By the way, someone Wasim Art in chat said that Joel is such a fantastic artist, and I have to agree.
Oh,
Um,
thank you. What's his
it,
name?
it was Wasim Art.
Oh, Weston. Weston. Hi,
Yep.
Weston. Hope you're well, buddy. I know him.
It's interesting what you were saying, and I think it shows in your art as well, right? You said that you have been you've been drawing since you were a kid, and you've always had a passion for that. And I think I shouldn't say I think. I mean, it shows in the art that you produce as well, right? Because it shows that you care about it. You put your own personality. Um, you put life into the characters. It's not just a flat canvas, right? I would, when I look at the artwork, I imagine that you see the world that is around the characters that you draw, not just the flat character that is in front of you, right? Where do you get the inspiration for those things? Because even though you, like you said, you like keeping to a certain style, but where do you draw inspiration when you still work with different types of art or for different projects and so forth? How do you get into the zone for each project?
So when I create artwork, it's 95% it's character centered. Characters play a central role in my characters, but to bring those characters to life, of course you need to pay attention to anatomy and light, all the fundamentals of art. That I'm not sure most people will recognize immediately because they're specific terms. But besides those fundamentals, I like to support my characters with a background, because the background in a character is like a symbiotic element that can bring them to life and that can make the entire narrative way more interesting. So the background, it's also, you can also consider that as a secondary character when it comes to mood, when it comes to lighting, background characters, buildings. All of these elements should support your character in essence. And it was tough for me in the beginning because I needed to study backgrounds, because when I was a kid I painted characters mostly. All the time on a blank canvas, very small. I was drawing very small, like on the paper. I was never working to do plein air paintings, landscape paintings. I was learning to do that later. So it took a lot of time for me to integrate it into my process properly. But eventually I'm happy that I pushed through that, because that was actually a boundary for me. It was a boundary for me to learn how to paint realistically, because I was afraid of failing, as in essence. I was afraid of trying to put a character into an environment. While that for me, right now, is one of the most important things in my personal artwork, to bring the characters to life through adding a background. Mm-hmm. Well, the funny thing is that I have character illustrations and I have character designs. I separated those two sections for me like that. And the character design is mostly focusing on apparel, and the character illustration is really the entire narrative, as I just wrote. But these days, I'm also adding a background to my character designs, because it adds so much more depth, the mood, the colors, everything adds just another level to what you're putting on the canvas, essentially.
Yeah, and it really shows. I'm going to show, just for purposes of the chat or the viewers right now. It shows in the art. I just pulled up your portfolio, for example, on your website. And like you said, that you add background artwork, like there's action. This is like a lot of these photos, or not photos. A lot of these pieces of art. The reason why I said photos is I said it looks like you took a snapshot of a scene that is happening. Right. There's life happening. There are characters that are around, and there are sometimes, even if you're drawing, of course, the main character, but there are other characters in the background. There are other things that are happening. There's weather. There are animals, and there are all these things that just add so much depth to the artwork, right? And this is one of the things too in Dark Ages, that it feels like when I look at some of the characters that you drew in Dark Ages, we don't just see a portrait of someone, kind of like if you were to go to a museum and you see portraits of old rulers and kings. They were very lifeless because they were so staged and static, right? Here in your artwork, you add life because of the background and because of even just how like the clothing flows on them. Everything is like there's movement and there are things happening in the scene around them.
I think you phrased that pretty well, because my intention was you as a player are those characters, so you need to put yourself into these characters, and so they needed to resonate with the viewer. So from that POV, there was also a part of the art direction that I received from Cuba, that I needed to make every character look different and have a certain personality, and that was a pretty interesting briefing that he gave me. I liked working with him. So it also shows a little bit of the personality of the characters as they were in history, because it characters that are chosen for the board game Dark Ages are not well-known characters. I mean, the characters that you play as. I mean, you get the generals that you can hire. Those are well-known heroes, like Joan of Arc.
Yep.
Who else? You get El Cid. But characters that you play as, I mean, Burkhardt, Garrow the Great, nobody knows these characters. So you need to make them relatable. You need to teach people about these characters with the limited resources that are at your disposal as an artist and as a game designer, because we work together, we both need to convey these elements to the viewer. And I like doing that, because the first thing that I did when I was working on these characters was, of course, Wikipedia and perhaps a YouTube video or two. And through Wikipedia, the knowledge was very limited, so I needed to look for certain elements that stand out, and perhaps even go back to the game itself to look at conceptual bullet points that I could use for the game. So, for example, you got the character, I think it was Burkhardt. He's wearing a nice Teutonic Knights Templar suit of armor. And that's because he, in the game, brings Teutonic Knights. He's a badass. He recruits Teutonic Knights for you, which are very strong units. So I'm not even sure if he was a member of the Teutonic Order. I'm not sure if that's a historical fact. But to push that sense of immersion into the game, I took some liberties. So he could very well be a member of the Teutonic Order of Germany, or he could not be a member of it. It doesn't matter, because we need to push that conceptual pointer. And just to tie into that one is I got some criticism about my depiction of El Cid. He was a Spanish knight that fought for the Abbasids, the Arabs that invaded Spain around 960 AD was the knight, from what I'm sure. And I gave him Saracen armor and a curved blade, and people told me that he didn't look European enough. But I mean, he fought for the Arabs, so he most likely got Arabic-looking armor because he was banished from his European, from Spain. So he fought for the Arabs. So they most likely gave him armor, they gave him weaponry, and there's also a little bit of representation of different cultures. Even though the game is centered on Europe, I like to represent different cultures in my personal artwork, but also thought it was fitting for this game to include a little bit of Arabic or Slavic apparel, Viking apparel as well. So it's not just European, and that's a little bit of spice to it.
By the way, thank you, Wasim, for following. I really appreciate it. Wasim was also saying that there's a lot of storytelling involved in your illustrations. I think with El Cid in particular, it's one of those things where you can easily ask yourself, whose view of El Cid are you depicting? Because it's easy to say, well, from a European point of view, okay, he was from Spain, he should look European. But what if we ask the Arabs that he was fighting for? At that point, they would have depicted him as one of them. And like you said, most likely he received armor and weaponry because he fought for them, he was on their side. So at that point, he was not a European. He fought on their side, right? So I mean, it's interesting to bring that into perspective as well, right? That sometimes this is just, it's a snapshot of the characters at one point in their lives, but it needs to tell a story of who were they, who were they in their like, what was their character like, what was their life like? Because you have a single portrait or a single stance to tell a story about that character, and that's a bit of a challenge, and it's something that I wouldn't necessarily call it taking liberties, but it's It's something like, it's the same thing when you look at, often people complain when you take a book, for example, and you turn that into a movie. And people say, oh, well, this is nothing like it. Well, but this is a different medium, right? We're talking about a medium of depicting something in motion picture. With artwork, you have only that image. You have no text, you have nothing else, you have a single image to depict a character that encompasses their entire life, right? It needs to tell that story. And I think that's, I feel that way when I look at the characters that you draw, that it's not just like we get a snapshot into a moment in their life, but there's more to it. There's a history of something that happened in the past that led up to that moment. There's also a future, what happened afterwards. And I think that's evoking those emotions and those thoughts is really impressive in your artwork.
Oh, well, thank you very much for saying that. And what I also would like to add to this point is that, just to tie into what you're saying, is that whatever medium you're using in terms of artwork, you're going to go through extremes. So you want to exaggerate the vision you have for the game or movie through the visual medium. And I think that collaboration between Kuba and me worked really well to make that translation work. And I liked the options that were presented to me in terms of character designs that could be translated in such a way. And I think the well-known character from the bunch of the table characters is Rollo from the Viking overlord Rollo. For those who see the series Vikings, he is a character in the series from the History Channel. He went to Normandy. He fought the Normans. No, not the Normans, my apologies, the Franks. The Normans came later.
Yep.
He fought the Franks and he conquered them partially. So the Frankish king gave him a big sack of gold and asked him, rather than fighting us, I give you money, you don't attack us, and you fight against your countrymen. That's what he did. So I depicted him as a Viking, obviously, but like a very bored Viking, because he's just sitting the entire day, living as a Frankish nobleman. And living as a Frankish nobleman, they were mostly preserving their empire. They were not really militaristic at that point yet, so they were not really expanding. It came later. So I really wanted to have that relationship between these two aspects of his life, the bored Frankish part and the little bit of Viking that he still has left inside of him, with his rune sigil attached to his armor. While he most likely did not dress that way inside his court, because again he was a vassal of the Franks, so he was baptized. He needed to baptize, he needed to wear Christianized apparel. But I decided to go for the Viking look anyway, just to emphasize that this guy is a Viking. He is different than the rest of the European monarchs. So I also would like to add that part as an example to different characters that we have.
Now, the other thing that I think is interesting when we're talking about European history, for example. A lot of people, I think, make the assumption that just because we're dealing with European history, that is, for the most part, quite well documented, especially if we're looking at the bigger picture, right? We look at the chronicles of what happened over the course of the history of a certain nation or a ruler or whatever. It's relatively well documented, but it's also very skewed from either, depending on who wrote a certain part of history, right? They either left out heroic deeds because they wanted someone to look bad, or they left out the things that didn't go so well because they wanted themselves to look better or whatever. But also, in addition to that, there isn't a lot of, especially this time period, right, of the Dark Ages, there's not a lot known about what did they look like, what was this specific ruler like, because we obviously, to the extent that there even was art and depictions or descriptions, this was also a very violent and rough time in European history where a lot of those things were destroyed. Whenever a ruler came in, they tried to erase the history of previous rulers and so forth. How did you manage to approach that of both staying accurate to the history of the individual characters, but also that time period, and how did you approach illustrating these characters based on that?
So what I did, the first thing that I did when I was going to tackle a specific character in terms of painting, I was going to see if there are already existing images based around this character. That's the first thing that I did, because perhaps he has a physical quirk or a certain piece of apparel that I needed to bring onto my painting. For example, the Czech mercenary lord Jan Žižka, he lost an eye, unfortunately, and then he lost his other one. I found out this week after playing Age of Empires in the expansion. So he unfortunately lost both his eyes and more, but he was most known for having like an eye patch over his face. And that's something that I wanted to take with me into the painting, this iconic eye patch. Mm-hmm. So first I'm going to look to the existing apparel, and then I'm going to see, are there any are there any written aspects about these characters that I can take with me into the painting? And that's most likely the case a lot of times. For example, you have this character which is from Lombardy, from Italy, and then I needed to see, alright, how did the Lombards look like? And then I took inspiration from armor sets that were 100 years prior to that time that this particular character was alive. But I still took that inspiration because I thought it looked cool and it made sense for that, for his ancestry to dress like that. So you might most likely have a little bit of armor that looked more modern at the time, but I just wanted to convey to the viewer this character is descended from the Lombards, who were Germanic people, essentially. So, just to sum it up, I'm going to look for existing artwork based on these characters in terms of any form of medium, be it older artwork from scriptures, be it movies, comics, etc. And then I'm going to translate it to my own artwork, combined with written text. And that text should support how this character would have most likely looked like, or could look like, for the purpose of the board game.
Right, thank you. I'm just going to pull up here as well and show, as we're talking about, sorry, I'm just pulling up some of the characters in the artwork. So you were talking about some of the leaders, and I just want to show also, again, the life, how they feel like they're different individuals. Like you said something good earlier, that when people play the game, they take on the role of that character, and you don't want to just be having the sense that, okay, well, I'm that I'm a generic character, but you're a specific character, right? You're an actual individual, and you want, as a player, you want to feel that not only your abilities, the game mechanisms, that those are the ones that set you apart, but also the depiction of it, that you have a personality and so forth from the artwork. So I'm just showing here the leaders from, and this is specifically from the Holy Roman Empire. You have the King of Moravia, for example. And we're looking here at both who they are, and just how they are depicted. Here you have someone who looks noble and proud, and you can see that their character is depicting a certain time in history, right, where they were a proud leader. But we also look. I am fascinated by the fact that there are different. I mean, they all have different ages. Some of them you decided to depict them younger. Some of them are older. Again, showing that there is history to them. Some of them were leaders for a long time. Some of them were. I guess what I'm trying to say is that one thing that we unfortunately see when we're dealing with this type of like the Dark Ages and medieval artwork, most of the time it's very samey, right? Particularly in games where it's that they're often the same age, they're often depicted with the same type of armor or whatever, which wasn't the case. I mean, these are people, and they feel and look individual and different. So that when you get this card in front of you and say, okay, well, this is your leader. There is a difference in that artwork, and not everyone looks or feels the same, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate, right, in the artwork.
Yeah, because these characters, in terms of armor, you can do a lot of things with armor. Now we're going to go into the conceptual side of the characters a little bit more. So when I grew up, my mother bought me some Warhammer when I became 10 years old, and that Warhammer escalated ridiculously, and I bought a lot more. I invested a lot of time into the lore of Warhammer, and I was inspired by the armor sets of Warhammer, etc., and how they dress up their characters. So it was always a big inspiration for me. But that transition from Warhammer to making more realistic artwork like I'm doing right now was eventually made. And everything became a little more toned down when I painted more historically accurate apparel. But I never lost my initial inspiration from those early days. So when you, for example, look at the game's workshop concept design, they have a lot of details in there. You know, a lot of bits and pieces that tell something about the character. Some things are exaggerated, some things are a little bit odd, a little bit unique. So from those days that I collected and painted Warhammer, I took a lot of inspiration and I tried to translate to my character designs today. Perhaps subconsciously, because I don't really think about Warhammer too often these days. But I think I still think that those choices made by the designers back in the day have altered a lot of the landscape when it comes to looking at historical designs overall. Not only for me, but in the entire scape of the conceptual characters. Another example is, for example, God of War. When you look at the God of War from 10 years ago, the release of God of War from 10 years ago had like the most ridiculous, exaggerated armor sets, you know, full-on Blizzard. It was very popular around that time, but these days, everything is a little bit more toned down when it comes to the armor. It's more historically accurate, but there's still a little bit of edge to the apparel. There's a little bit of uniqueness. It stands out. It has a lot of character. And I think that we, as an artistic community, are also evolving, also with trends, but also with the fact that we are filtering things out, our processes, if you know what I mean. So we are always growing in terms of ideas on how to tackle our character designs. And this is also something that I wanted to bring to Dark Ages essentially. So what I would like to give to aspiring artists that may be listening is always try to go back to the past and change it, alter the past to your current desires in terms of what you think is appropriate for your current design choices. So it's a big mouthful, I know. I'm covering a lot of subjects, a lot of processes, but I really think that looking back at fantasy that has been done earlier and translating it to entertainment, modern day entertainment, you always like to go back a little bit a few years ago to see what the current trends were back in the day and what they could be right now. Because we're always evolving, because we're learning from our masters in the past, whoever they may be, and we're trying to keep things fresh these days. Because if I would have painted the characters on what I would think is 100% historically accurate, they would not look as interesting as they look right now.
Right.
I said you're opening a history book. I mean, we've all opened a history book. We know how knights look like, but you want to have a little bit of immersion. For immersion, I personally recommend going to historical fantasy, that's been done back in the day, and getting just a tiny little bit out of it to translate to your current historical designs. It just has a little bit of edge to it. IP or brand that does it perfectly is Assassin's Creed. I got so much inspiration from Assassin's Creed. They're pushing their boundaries a lot, but it still works. Their designs still work really well, and they have that really amazing cool factor to it, while still being toned down. While at the same time they're pushing their boundaries all the time because they gotta stay fresh. And they also have like this really sci-fi armor, for example, that you can take. But their normal armor sets, they have very unique elements to it that I'm convinced have been inspired from fantasy that has been made decades ago.
Yep. No, and I think you bring up a good point, because it's first of all, like when you sit down and play Dark Ages, for example, you feel that everything is a cohesive presentation. Everything from the graphic design on the cards to the characters, to the artwork, to buildings that are depicted, the landscape and everything. And like you said, there's a balance there between what's realistic and what's, like, for example, the map, the board itself, it's not 100% geographically accurate. But part of that is, of course, for gameplay reasons, because there are certain regions that need to be adjacent, or that are adjacent to each other, but that would be slightly at a different angle, and you can't just increase the board too much, right? But what I find fascinating is the fact that I feel that there's such a nice combination of what the worldview was back then, because of course then people had no idea how big the world was. They didn't know much outside of their local regions, unless they were some that traveled a lot, or they were nomadic or so. But otherwise, for the most part, they didn't know much about the world beyond their borders. I mean, we look at maps from the 1600s. I mean, they were awful in terms of accuracy, right? Because people were drawing the world as they saw it, right? But I feel like the marriage between historical accuracy and the fact that it's a game about history, but we're playing it now, so it's a modern board game. And then you also have to take into account, like you were saying, the expectations of the viewer or the player who will be sitting down. Because again, our view of especially European history that has been used, and I'm not saying that this is a negative, but it has influenced a lot of things. Like you're talking about historical fantasy, or we're looking at at movies and so forth. Vikings, for example. I mean, I grew up in Sweden, so I'm familiar with the Vikings, what they actually looked like, and they're not very interesting. I mean, they had and mostly because it's expensive, right? You can't walk around in armor and nice leather fur clothing or whatever all the time. It's too expensive and impractical. So what they actually dressed like, it's not super exciting because that was the times. But when we are watching something, we're watching a movie or we are playing a game and we have someone, we know that they had Viking heritage, for example. We want to see that, even if that's not how they dressed on a day-to-day basis, right? And I like how that it comes together so well in the artwork. So
it's funny that you bring up Vikings because I completely see where you're coming from in essence. Because I would like to bet that most people have been taught. Not sure about you because you're from Sweden, but that Vikings have horns on their helmets, and that prospect is being moved at right now. Most people are they're laughing about it because it doesn't make any practical sense to have horns on your helmet. So you are not going to see that in the series Vikings. They don't have that. You have one character who actually has a helmet with horns in the final season, and that character is like this bandit, rogue Viking, but they added it for give them a cool evil factor to it, so it works in that regard. But what they've also done in Viking is, first of all, almost no one is wearing helmets because you're going to see how cool Travis Fimmel looks with his braids. But they're also wearing like this biker leather coats that also don't make any practical sense. They would have most likely not have worn that back in the day. So again, you're seeing those little bits of historical inaccuracies taking shape for artistic liberty. I mean, we as a viewer, you have seen Vikings, right?
Yes. Yep.
Yes. Did you care about these elements? Did you care about the fact that they were like wearing these leather coats and stuff like that?
No, I mean, I think that the reality is that if you were to depict Vikings with more historical accuracy, first of all, the majority of them were farmers, right? They were not all raiders and warriors. And even when they went on raids, a lot of them, they were originally farmers. They just suited up and they're like, well, let's go and raid somewhere. A lot of times they built this reputation of being fierce warriors. And often they didn't have to fight at all. They would go and they would raid, but they were not always they were dirty fighters, right? I mean, they didn't need the same. So even like when they went on all their long ships, and we have stories and records, and they would send out raiding parties of some really able warriors, but then they would send long ships with just the rest of the people. There were farmers and normal villagers, and people were just afraid, oh no, here come the Vikings, and people gave up without much of a fight. And yes, they did have swords, and they had excellent swordsmiths and armor smiths. But this is not something that they just wanted to go and settle in a new area. They were not out to go and just raid from one place to another. They were just looking for new land, and they wanted to settle and be farmers or jewelry smiths, whatever it was. And if you were, yeah, go ahead.
No, I don't want to interrupt you. If you're,
So I was just going to say that if you were to depict them accurately, that means that when you get a shot of them in a village, they were all dressed the same in the clothing that was typical of that time, which means some kind of robe, very boring and drab colors, and they used the resources that they had, leather and so forth, for other practical reasons, for not so much for clothing always, because that was not, like, they didn't need to wear a vest for protection most of the time, because that just wasn't part of their life. But now to then answer your question, when I watch it, I want to see that, because those are the parts that are exciting. It's not exciting to hear that Eric the Red, that he liked potatoes. I mean, no one cares about that because it's not. Well, I guess they wouldn't have had potatoes then. But in any case, I mean, those are not the stories that we. You look at the rune stones, for example. They would go and they would be gone for. They would go on a quest for 5-10 years, and then he would come back and carve a rune stone about a day in that quest, right?
Yeah.
And but those are the stories that they came back and told. Those are the stories. If you imagine them sitting and drinking their mead and celebrating and whatever around the fire, those are the moments that they lived for. Those are the sagas and the things that were built. You look at Norse mythology, for example, that is it's based on epic and big events. So in a movie or in a game, I want to see that. I don't care as a viewer, right? Yeah, I want to see the excitement. I want to see those moments, because that's where their character came from. Otherwise, they were medieval people like everyone else, just trying to survive.
Exactly.
But I also think in this case, taking those liberties, I think it's important to then also make a distinction, partly because we talk about this at other times because we do, of course, games that are related to other cultures. In this case, with Dark Ages, taking liberties, I have no problem with, because we're European ourselves, and depicting things in a way that tells a story about the people and their lives. Again, you have a single image to tell a life story. It's fine, because that's part of our own culture, and therefore I don't mind it.
You're not doing it too much. You're not, how do you say it? You're not, if you're drawing painting a knight, you're not going to give him like space marine armor, for example. It's
right.
Still like 80% historically accurate.
Yep.
20% to 10% fantasy, just to make it look more interesting. And I mean, it's just a necessity these days, because we're getting bombarded with information. We're saturated with visual information regarding any medium. Give me any medium, be it video games, be it board games, be it art books, comics. We are saturated with information, so every new IP needs to stand out from the other. Don't care how you do it. If you're a world builder, it has to stand out. So for that point, you need to have a little 10 to 20% of personal interpretation or inspiration to make things stand out. And if people are complaining about it, I mean, people have complained to me that X or Y didn't look historically accurate in my historical artworks, and that were when I was exaggerating too much. For example, I painted a Byzantine warrior once, and I thought, oh, this armor looks cool, oh, that piece of sword looks cool, for example, and I rolled them all together, and when you looked in depth, you could see that there are some Byzantine elements to it, but like the key elements of his weaponry, of his armor, were not Byzantine at all. There were even people telling me, oh, that sword is like 13th century Frankish or something like that. Well, I mean, I messed up a little bit though. So it's a tough road to walk on when you are taking inspiration from too many sources that are not relying too much with one another. But sometimes you can express yourself really nicely today. Because, for example, for my personal wall building, on my website, like the leftmost painting with the birds, it's actually a Hebrew warrior. I've painted a Hebrew warrior, and that character, I mean, we don't know how Hebrew warriors look like, because, I mean, there were only scriptures left, and their armor was looted when their empire was eventually destroyed. Like a few times, it was destroyed either by the Assyrians or by the Babylonians or by the Romans. But it was known that after King Solomon, the Israelite nation, the Hebrews, were very, very wealthy. They have a lot of money, so they were also pretty strong in terms of military power. So I decided to use my personal interpretation and get a little bit of inspiration from ancient Levantine armor sets from the early ancient times, around 750 BC, as well as combined with Levantine armor and apparel from way in the future, and to bring those two elements together to create a new character design. So that's a little bit of historical fantasy that I push in there, put in the piece. So it's not exaggerated, it's not wearing Space Marine armor or Chaos Warrior armor, it's not too much over the top. I mean, I've painted it in such a way that it could have existed, and that's enough for me. I don't like it when it's too over the top. But it's a tough line to walk on. It's tough. It's very tricky to balance it that way when you're going with historical accuracy on one hand and personal interpretation on the other.
Now you bring up
Yes.
No, I was going to say you bring up a good point, because that's the challenge, right? It's one thing. Obviously, we can't say that there's no art that is not inspired by something, right? Everything is inspired by historical or cultural things in some way. Even if you look at things that feel original in some point, like everything is based on everything that we have today, at least when it comes to fantasy and so forth. It's based on either folk tales or something or other depictions that were then exaggerated or changed over time or whatever. But it's challenging when it's one thing to depict a person that is a generic person, like a day in the life of a village somewhere, versus depicting an actual historical person, especially if they are a person that is actually they have a history or a record, right? And that's I can imagine it's challenging to, again, like you said, walk that line between finding what's historically accurate or finding records of it versus then also drawing something that feels because you have to fill in the blanks between what you know about them and what you don't. I wanted to ask, when it comes to your art and such and the things that you draw, do you have a favorite, not necessarily a piece of art, but a favorite, how do I put this? Do you have a favorite style, as in when you draw characters and so forth? Like, do you have a favorite type of character, like who they are, or a specific setting or so that you prefer drawing?
So, for me personally, it shifted through a lot of ages over the course of time. So, for example, when I was a little kid, I loved painting crusaders for some reason, and Roman warriors. I like to paint, just general knights, Arthurian knights. These days, a few years ago, I like to paint, Turkic and Mongolian warriors. And currently, I like to paint, ancient Levantine. As I told you earlier, I'm working on my world building, which is set in the ancient times. So there are going to be a lot of Levantine, Mesopotamian, Hellenistic, African cultures are going to be present there. So, in a nutshell, ancient history. I've already mentioned the piece with the Hebrew warrior with the cranes. They were sending cranes to spy on enemies. That's actually a historical fact. They were sending cranes to see where the enemies were, and if they would circle around the army of the enemy, then they would know that the army is there. And the army is there. So that's why I brought back to that particular painting. I'm not sure if it's open right now because I can't see the stream, but I think
I just had it. I can bring that one up again.
if you want, I think most people see it anyway, so it's
Yep.
okay. But just to answer your question, ancient history is my jam. Yes.
What about the different landscapes and stuff? Because I've seen, I mean, in some areas you have some characters are depicted with a very vast landscape behind them. Others are depicted in a very intimate and close-up setting where you're right in the action. Like again, the one on your portfolio page where you have the cavalry riding in. You're right there in the midst of the action. You see the dust picking up and so forth. Other times there are buildings in the background. Like what's your style there? Do you prefer the more action-filled shots versus?
That's a very good question, and I'll gladly answer it. I personally prefer, because I'm still working on my world building, and that's generally my preference as well. I like to create more portrait-oriented illustrations. So I would like to choose a certain character that I have in my mind and create a world around it. Bringing to life through, as I said at the very beginning, the background, the apparel, etc. And the scene with a nice charging. It was a commission from around a year ago that I made for Five Force Games, I think it was. Yes, for their miniature collection box set. It's also something that I enjoy doing. I like dynamic scenes, but I don't like it as much as creating portraits. This is my personal artwork. Just generally speaking, I like doing both. It's very challenging to create a decent-looking action scene, but for me to create those action scenes, I need to have a world. The world is being built with characters. So first you create the characters, and then you are going to put those characters in action scenes. That's what my course of action is currently. I don't have a lot of time to work on my world building right now, so I have very limited amount of time. So the time that I have is put into creating characters, and the rest of the time I have to freelance. So later down the road, I hope that when I have more time, I'm going to actually let these characters interact with one another and create stories about history, biblical themes, mythology, all those things that are inspired music. Stories.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been fascinating talking with you and just hearing. I love hearing the thought process that goes on and that goes into this. I think in particular in board games, we're blessed with a wealth of different artists and illustrators, and we have people that specialize in different things. Like you said, you like to focus on the characters and so forth. You don't want to do necessarily then the graphic design and stuff. But then we have others who that's what they do. They do the graphic design and it is amazing how in board games we have this, and I shouldn't say just board games. I mean, this obviously extends to other games in general, RPGs and so forth as well. But there's so much there for us to enjoy, different styles, different stories to be told, that just helps and makes for a more immersive experience. And it's fascinating also to talk to you and hear about your process of what goes into creating the art and the research, because it's a lot of work to it's not just about sitting down and drawing something, right? It's the
a lot of work. There comes a lot of work beforehand that you need to tackle to actually create the result that everyone is happy with. Both, in this case, Board&Dice, and the other hand, myself, because if the client is not happy, I'm not happy as well. So beforehand, I learned that not only the technical aspect, but also the conceptual aspect. You need to spend in a lot of time to create those unique ideas. But what you said, that we are blessed with a lot of conceptual games, both in the technical aspect and the gameplay, and visual aspect, artwork. And what I like about that is that we are never finished with designing games in
Right.
terms of stories, artwork, gameplay. There's always someone bringing something new to the table, and there's always someone trying to push those boundaries. And with Kickstarter is a great platform. We are able to print our own miniatures in our home these days. As I said earlier, when I was 10 years old, my mother bought me with Warhammer miniatures. I would never dream of it, but technically speaking, I could be printing those miniatures in my home. I don't have a 3D printer, but a lot of people do. So it's really impressive what these evolutions that we get in the entertainment industry have come to. And on artistic terms, there are also a lot of great artists that are popping up. And I need to watch out because the competition is getting bigger and bigger. But so there are a lot of great artists rising up, and the knowledge is also more approachable than ever. Knowledge is accessible. My apology. Accessible, super accessible. People are growing in their skills rapidly. Standards are increasing of what is considered good artwork. There's also a lot of demand for artists, so there's a lot of supply and demand. For those who push through the craft of artwork and reach a level that they are content with, and the client could be content with, it's a great time to be alive because there are a lot of job offers. So yeah.
Yeah.
I hope you understand what I'm saying, because you in the game world perhaps notice this as well. There are a lot of products releasing all the time. Everyone in their quote-unquote mother's basement is having ideas that they're putting on in practical shape, right? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely not, like you said, there's not going to be an end to innovation. There's not going to be an end to a need for new things, even in some areas that have been depicted. Just to take an example, we've had very recently, we've had several games about both Paris and Rome, for example. And you would say, well, these are two cities that have been depicted so many times in different medium and in art and everything, but there's always a new way to look at it. There's a new story to tell. There's a new viewpoint, a new angle, and it brings these games, it brings the stories to life. And I just think that it's wonderful to have artists like you you're interested in exploring these things. And it's hopefully that is also then an inspiration for upcoming artists, right? We need more of them. We always need more people to come and to tell these stories, or to take a story and put life into it.
Yeah, I 100% I agree with you. You phrased it very well, Rainer, and I just would like personally to encourage more artists to pursue their dreams, because most people, including myself, when I started out as an artist, I did not know what I could have done, what was possible with art. I mean, most people think, oh, there's a studio here, there's a studio there. That's the only way I can go and make art. But freelance art is ridiculously large. You're going to be a starving artist. There's no reason for you to become a starving artist if you just work on your portfolio and dedicate to your craft. If there are any aspiring artists listening, I would like to encourage you, if you are feeling down, if you feel like it's not for you, artwork is too tough, just make sure, that's my advice, just make sure that the road you walk to reaching that goal to become an artist is fun for you. Make sure that you enjoy the road, and before you realize it, the job offers will come to you. So just know there's a lot of markets, not only big guys like Board&Dice. There are a lot of clients that require great artwork. So that's my advice. Just keep pursuing those creative goals. You need more of them. I was just a question for you, Rainer. we have time for some questions? Perhaps if folks want to ask you anything or ask us.
Yeah, if there are any questions that you want to ask, please type them in the chat. We're happy to answer any questions. It's always, and like we were talking about earlier as well, there might be things that that pop up after as well. Some people, depending on time zone that they're in and so forth. But I just want to come back to what you said as well about aspiring artists. I think the message of having fun, right? Have fun with your craft, and there's no right or wrong way. Just like in music, as long as you make something that you enjoy, if you make art for yourself because this is the art that you enjoy, there will be other people that enjoy it as well, and that's important. It's important to find joy in what you're doing, and then yes, that there will be ways for you to be able to express this. It might not be today, but it might be tomorrow, and there will always be people that are looking for new types of art and depictions and so forth. Absolutely. I know we have. You might say when you look at some of our games that, okay, well, we have a certain style, and that might be true, but we're also looking for artists. You never know when there's a project that we want someone, and especially if you are an artist from outside of North America and Europe. We need more art from people all over the world to just enrich the experience that we get, to bring their culture, their experiences into it. That's what we want. We want the world to be more connected in the artwork as well, and that's what I think is so wonderful with this, is that people can tell their stories, and definitely don't be afraid to draw what you enjoy, and to then share that with others
people
as well.
People don't be attracted to it. If you, for example, there are people who are depicting, they're depicting African culture. It's amazing. It's amazing how they depict it, the research they put into this.
Yep.
For example, Asian cultures. There's a lot of richness to be explored when they are put onto the canvas, those ideas. So I 100% agree with you. Would also like to encourage more people, as you said, from a wider range of the world to also share a little bit of their culture, so that we can enjoy it as well, and hopefully bring everything together so that we can learn from one another and where we are coming from, where we have grown up, what we consumed as children, that is also being brought back into an artwork, our artwork one way or another. So I 100% agree with you, Rainer. I just want to add one thing to being an artist. Of course, it's very important that you need to enjoy the road to your goal of becoming a professional artist. But what I also meant is that you need to enjoy the road also with things that are less exciting, like studying. You need to study, you need to know the fundamentals. As I said, there are a lot of job offers, but there are a lot of job offers, but there's also a lot of great artists, right? There are also a lot of artist offers, and as I said, the average quality is getting bigger and bigger every year, and it can be intimidating. But as I said, if you enjoy the less exciting stuff, if you are frustrated with quote unquote not being good enough and you want to improve, that's a good place to be. But don't get discouraged. Just make sure that you find a road where the process, the less exciting things are fun for you. And that can be anything. It can be realistic art, it can be line art. And I can assure you that once you get good at anything in terms of art, people are going to be willing to pay you money for it. So that's also something they don't like to do. It can be a little bit demotivating, but don't be. Just make sure that you are honest with what you like to paint, and just be sure that there are people willing to spend money on good art in any form, anything.
Yeah.
Are there any questions, by the way? I'm excited to answer some questions.
No, there were not any questions right now, but we'll definitely if we get basically if you have questions and so forth, obviously you can still put them in the chat. But also, if you have what's a good way for people to reach you? Obviously, they can. You have your website where you have some portfolio. But if people want to follow you and follow your art, what are some good ways for?
My website, if you scroll down my website, I'm active on also pretty much all social media on Instagram. It's on my. I'm sorry, I'm updating my website. It's on my contact page. If you go to my website, joelholtzman.com, and you go to contact, then you should be able to see where it says find me on, and then you can see my email. So to spell my website is JoelHoltzman.com. So when you go to contact, you should be able to see where I'm present. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. I would love to connect with you over there. If people are having questions after viewing this live, don't hesitate to ask me personally. I'll gladly help you out. People helped me in the past as well with questions that I have had. And now I would like to return the favor. So happy to be here. Happy to be invited to be on this chat. And so shoot me a message if you have any questions, anyone, and make sure to help you out when I can.
Well, thank you so much, Joel. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on today. It's been great to talk to you about both your artwork, your inspiration, and also I really appreciate your message to other artists, right? Especially younger ones, and so forth. So
make art stuff and to be in early stages. It's where you're not sure the route you need to follow. It can be discouraging, but in this case, I'd like to encourage those aspiring artists to keep going. And if you are stuck with anything, you can shoot me a message, and if I have time, I'll try to help you out.
Well, thank you again, and thank you also to those who tuned in and watched this either live or after the fact. We will be back in a few minutes, and until then, thank you again, Joel, and stay tuned for what's coming up next.
Bye, everyone.